Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Switzerland, and we're gonna cover more the heart of the country and be some history as well. Flying into Switzerland, there's only two airports that you can land on if you come from North America. One is either Geneva or the other one is flying into Zurich. Now, if you're lucky and the pilot is inclined to take you a little bit over the Alps, and if it's a beautiful sunny day, you get once in a lifetime experience flying over the Alps, and it's great. Zurich is also at the end of Lake Zurich, and the river that flows through Zurich is called the Limmat. Now, Zurich is also the largest city in Switzerland. It's the center of all the banking, which you probably well aware of. And there is a museum of art. There is a Swiss National Museum. Then you can go to the old part, the city, or you can go visit the Großmünster Church, or you can go to Fraumünster, which has some beautiful stained glass windows designed by Chagall. And if you wander around town, you also come across a sculpture by Zwingli. And Zwingli was a reformist priest or minister, and he was also pushed to have a law that every child in Switzerland gets to go to school. And there's always something to see and do. Besides visiting the city, you can also take some hiking trips. So we took the train from the central station up to Uetliberg, and we had a nice lunch up there and then hiked from there. Uetliberg is overlooking the city. It also has a transmission tower for the television and the radio. But one of the things we enjoyed was having a nice lunch up there and overlooking the city and overlooking the lake. And Stefan is enjoying his lunch. And Monica and I looks like we just have a nice dessert. Just too bad the wine glasses are empty. I guess we're done with that. So now we're hiking southeast, parallel to the lake, all the way to Talville. And along the way there was these stations where they explained about the different planets and had maps with it, which was great. There's Stefan, Karen, Maria, and Monica. Happy hikers. Well, we're finally made it to the other end, and we're in Talville now, and we're waiting for the boat. Well, here comes the boat. We're ready to go back to Zurich. different journey. This time we're on the opposite side of the lake, and we're walking all the way down to Erlenbach. A beautiful morning. Everybody's ready, get the backpacks and ready to walk along. Now you're looking across the lake to the other side, Uetliberg. Now the other side is also referred to in Switzerland as the Gold Coast, because that's where all the rich bankers, etc. live down there. Well, we're feeling good. Keep walking. Up and up. Most of the hike was in the shade, which was nice because it hasn't warmed up during the day. And there's a field of sunflowers, which cheered up the world. Now that's my kind of hiking. Stefan brought a nice bottle of wine, and now it's time to be cheery and relax. Well, we're getting to the other end. Looks like we got to stop for a breather. Yeah, we're now back down by the lake in Erlenbach. Waiting for the ferry to come and pick us up and head back up towards Zurich. Well, we made it. Got an end station and time to get off and get home. We're heading to Steffa, which is at the other end of Lake Zurich, and it looks like they had a bit of a fall festival. And as if they didn't have enough mountains, they had to create their own slide for the kids, and lots of activities, a lot of bikers, a lot of happy faces, a lot of kids. So they closed the main road from Steffa to Rapperswil, so we biked towards Rapperswil, and looks like we weren't the only ones on the bikes. Now that looks like a bit of a challenging way to bike. And along the way, that Danny and Morella had their own little hideaways down by the lake where they could, without tourists, hang out, and they had a few boats there. And from here you can actually see over to Rapperswil. You see the castle. And we keep on going on the main road. Miko's doing a big advertising there. It's nice to see no cars. Now this was a funny thing. The challenge was to climb up and it's on top of those milk cans, and the cows act as counterweight. So if you slip and fell, the cows would stop you from dropping down. Well, you had to be there to experience that. Well, there's the ferry just leaving Rapperswil, heading back to Zurich. And even in downtown Rapperswil, there's a lot of activities. There's a walk going up to the castle. Lots of festivities. Everybody happy. Well, we're back in Zurich. We're on the Bahnhofstrasse, which is the most expensive street in Switzerland because it's where all the high-end stores are. And if you play Monopoly in Switzerland, that's where you wanted to have a property. On the Bahnhofstrasse, there's also a McDonald's hamburger place, and every time I see it, I think of the Burgernomics chart made by The Economist, where they compare hamburger prices around the world. And I look at it every year, and Switzerland always is right on top there. So if you're going to go to Switzerland, enjoy the view, enjoy the country, but make sure you got lots of money with you because you're going to need it. For those who don't speak German, Bahnhofstrasse essentially means it's a street that meets the railway station. And surprise, surprise, I was actually born on the Bahnhofstrasse. But I was not born with a silver spoon. It's more like I was born with a wooden spoon. However, this is what the house looked like where I was born in. It's the third house on your left. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. It was Bahnhofstrasse Eschlikon, not Bahnhofstrasse Zurich. Now this is an aerial view of Eschlikon, and towards the top of the picture, nestled against the hillside there, is what we used to refer to as the Old Town. But in 1855, the railroad came along, which you see in the lower part is the main railway station. So of course everybody wanted to live closer to the railway station, so they built a straight street, and they called it Bahnhofstrasse. Well, Eschlikon was actually mentioned first in the archives in 1280, and but the picture that shows the house was actually taken in 1927. Well, in 1950, the population of Eschlikon was 1,026, and that included me. But you can see at the time it was a relatively small community. Well, the village had 2 bakeries, 2 molkerei, I explain that in a minute, 1 drugstore, 2 grocery stores, they had 1 shoe store and 1 clothing stores, but there was 7 restaurants. Now, that's, at the first glance it looks a bit overdone, but part of the thing that I was thinking at the time was there was a lot of times places to meet. Now, if you were in a men's choir, women choir, or any organization, every time after your weekly choir practice, they all would go to a restaurant and just socialize. So I think the restaurants weren't as much for eating, they were mostly for socializing. Now the molkerei is where they would collect the milk from the farmers, and there was quite a few farmers in the village and surrounding areas, and then we would, as kids, go in the evenings, maybe once or twice a week, and get their milk. And they would also make butter and any other milk-related products. And they would once a week truck come by and get the excess milk, and I guess they would take it to sure chocolate factories would buy it, and it was cheesemaker. They needed a lot of milk. Now this is a property of my parents. My dad was a grower of flowers and vegetables, mostly vegetables, which he sold locally. And mother, she ran a store in the ground floor of the house. So you're asking me probably, well, what was life like in the 50s in a small town like that? Well, this is a picture of me in the first grade, and the teacher actually we had grade 1 and grade 2 were in the same room, and this teacher, Waltentweiler, everybody liked him. He's a nice guy. But you look at the clothing, you can see that there's a lot of plain clothes. There's no designer jeans, and the girls were not wearing designer dresses. There was some girls that didn't want to wear an apron because it was too old-fashioned. But life was very simple back then. Now this is, I believe, when we were in 3rd grade, and we had 4th and 5th grade. And I think we did have class split up a little more, but I know that usually was 3rd and 4th grade were together, and 5th and 6th. And I see some of the guys in there, they were a little bit older. But anyway, no tablets, no cell phones, and I know grade 1 we actually still use slates to learn the alphabet and do some basic math. You can always tell an eager kid when he's sitting in the front, in the middle, and but they're all smiling, and the photographer must have made a good joke because everybody's got a happy face. This is the schoolhouse where I went to grade 1 and 2. But I know it looks like it's a bigger building, but we just had the ground floor was the classroom, and I think the teacher's living upstairs, and the building attached to it was also residential. So it looks bigger than it is, but it was a nice little school, and we had a nice playground in the backyard. Now, we were lucky that we grew up with a whole bunch of other kids in the neighborhood, and all the parents were busy working, trying to make a living. But we had quite a few girls that kept us in line most of the time. This is my younger brother George with Heidi, who lived across the street. You can also see the farmhouse in the background. And this was a rather big event. The girls decided we should have a wedding. So they all got dressed up, and the girl on the right, Ruth, she lived in that farmhouse we just pointed out, and next to her is Ernst, and next to him is me, and then Heidi. Look at that. She put on a nice dress, and she even brought some flowers. And then there's Paul and George, and you can see that we all pretty well got along and kept ourselves busy. Well, one day somebody came up with the idea that, hey, we should have a Mickey Mouse Club. So we guys got together and we built a little shack, and that was our clubhouse. We sat in there, we played little games, and all was fine and dandy until one of the girls one day says, oh, I think it's time the boys learn how to knit. Well, I didn't think that was a good idea. So I quit the Mickey Mouse Club and things kind of petered out. So one day I found this Tinky Toys wheel, and so kept rolling it around in the living room, and of course that wasn't much fun. So I decided, well, let's go outside and see how far we can go. So all around the house is all gravel, so went out to the street. So I was rolling it across the road, and my younger brother George, he would roll it back, and that was fine and dandy for a while. Well, of course, traffic wasn't that much those days. But anyway, next car comes along, we decided, well, let's see if we can shoot it right underneath the car. So if you time it right, you go right underneath the car. Okay, I gave it a shot. Well, somehow the wheel must have hit something because it bounced up and hit the guy's door. Well, that guy slammed on his brake and come jumping out, and I just yelled at George, "Run, run, run, man, go, go!" And I ran. Of course, George, being a younger, he didn't get that far. So the guy caught up with him, grabbed him by the neck, and yelled at him and slapped him on the head. Just don't do it again. And well, poor George cried for 10 minutes, and then we agreed, well, we better not tell our parents about it because the consequences might not be any better. So what else can a kid do for excitement? Well, one day we came up with this scheme. What if you throw a wallet on the sidewalk and we put a string on it and we'll pull it away? Because when it usually after a train had arrived at the railway station, there'd be always some people coming home from work or visiting. So there's always people coming up the street. So there's one guy be sort of like a scout, make sure, yeah, somebody coming, quick, get ready, get ready. And of course some other kid probably standing by. Well, the funny part was mostly the women, they would bend down and reach for it, and then you pull on it, and they would kind of trying to reach it. Well, they clued in pretty quick, and they just had a good laugh. Well, one evening, things went a little sideways. So this guy, I guess he was in his early 20s, comes walking up the street, and he bends down to grab the wallet, and we do our thing, we pull. Well, he looks up, and he quickly figures out what's going on. So he comes around the other side. Of course, with us, like, run, run, man, he's going to get us. So have you ever seen a dog chase a rabbit? Well, we were the rabbits. Run like hell, and but he was strong and fast, so we ran into a field behind the house, and there's some apple trees. I figured, we'll hide behind the tree, but he caught up with one of us and grabbed him by the neck and shook him up a bit. Of course, then we were all peeking out from behind the trees, and then he just looked at us and he started laughing because he knew what we were up to, and he knew we were just kids. So, but then we kind of were thinking about it, is that, well, luckily he was a good-natured guy, but what if the next guy is nasty? So that kind of bit damper in our fun in that department. So one day, an older kid was telling us about carbide and what you can do with carbide. And so just a few houses down from us, there was a guy who had a plumbing shop, and he did some welding. So I thought, well, let's go check it out, what he's doing. So then he had this, looked sort of like gravel, but that was carbide. But that stuff was magic, because you put water on it, it starts bubbling, you put a match to it, it burns. Well, what's a smart kid to do with that? We weren't going to do any welding or anything. We got creative. See, you get a tin, you punch a hole in top, you put the carbide down on the ground, sprinkle a bit of water on it, and then you put the tin over top, and then it's all a matter of timing. And if you hit it just right, you get a light up a little straw, because you didn't want to be over top of that thing. So light up a straw, put it over that little hole on top of the tin, and boom, that thing went up in the air 20, 30 feet if you had it just right. But of course that was not our way to spend a stupid afternoon. Of course we couldn't do that in the village, so we had to kind of go outside of town, because it wasn't the sort of thing that people appreciated. Well, we had our excitement in the summer, but we never failed in the wintertime. We had a sled similar to this, and one of the fun things, or maybe a little bit of stupid things, was you get on a sled and then you hook your feet into the front of his sled, and then a guy in front of you hooks in his feet in the sled. So you get 6 or 7 in a row. So you come down, and if you were on a road that's a snowpack, and the front guy would start swerving a little bit, well, the guy at the very back was like a cat swishing the tail. The further back you were, the more you got swung around. So it was a wild ride for the guy in the back. As they say, it takes a village to raise a child. Come winter time to go skiing. Our parents didn't ski, and we were too young to be able to go down to the mountains. But we had a neighbor, and once in a while he would ask if we want to go skiing with him. And he basically, we'd be 6 or 7 guys go skiing with him, and he was the chaperone. And at that time they had on Sunday mornings in the wintertime a special train that was just dedicated for skiers. So you'd seen the excitement in the morning getting on the train, and by coming home was a different story. There was just barely a beep. Everybody was tired. Well, also we had another neighbor who had a Volkswagen, and he offered us a ride to go up to Unterwasser for skiing. And I remember this one time he had a Volkswagen Beetle, and he said, "Oh, we got to pick up my girlfriend along the way." So she lived up on quite of a steep hill, so we couldn't make it up the hill because it was snow and it was too steep. So he said, "Well, there was 3 of us in the back seats. Okay, guys, get out, stand on the bumper, and just rock up and down." Well, we made it up that hill. Now you try to do that with your Tesla. Once we got to Unterwasser, either by train or by car, then we took the Iltios Bergbahn, and up there we went. And then we sort of agreed where we would meet for lunch, usually where the station, the rail station was, and we'd either have lunch there, and then we said, okay, well, we got to catch a train such and such time. We'll meet at the same place where we had lunch, and then we ski down to the valley and get back in the train or car. Well, life wasn't just all fun and games. Our dad figured out pretty early on that having 4 boys could be quite handy. It was cheap labor, and so he went to the farmer's market in the summertime in Frauenfeld. So the day before, Fridays, we always had to prepare the vegetables, and some Saturday mornings, depending what was in bloom, I'd have to get up at 5 o'clock, and especially with the gladiolas, he would cut the flowers and I'd be holding him and put him in buckets and load him on the truck, and he would go off to Frauenfeld, and I go to school. Yes, we ended up having school Saturday morning. So Frauenfeld is the capital of Canton Thurgau, and it's fairly big and fairly old, I guess, but it was a big enough market where our dad could make some money there. And it kind of startled me when I saw this picture that this is exactly how it looked like. There was these trees where our dad set up his booth, and in the summer holidays, I would have to go and help him out some Saturdays. I was never too keen on that, but didn't really have any choices. One summer, I guess I was about 13, Carl came home. He was already living away in Fribourg, in the seminary, and he asked us, "Hey guys, you want to go for a bike trip?" Of course, we thought, well, going on a bike trip is better than having to pull weeds all the time and working in the garden. So he figured it all out, and he decided, well, we're going to go to Interlaken, and we stay in the youth hostels. And so off we went. And I remember going through Zurich, and I was scared skinny because I knew that when you got a big city like that, you had streetcars, and the streetcar tracks are in the pavement. So, and if your wheel gets cut in there, you're toast. So I was worried, man. And Carl be at the front saying, "Okay, turn left, turn right, and look out for this and look out for that." I don't remember anything about Zurich other than just, well, we survived. And I remember getting to Interlaken, and it was a hot day, and we booked in our youth hostel, and it was just had one big room with a whole bunch of mattresses on the floor, and that was where we stayed. And I think they also provided meals. And then we also had to go over the overpass, over the Schustenpass. It was a steep uphill go, and I only had one speed, and that was it. While Carl, the only bike with a 3-speed transmission, so it was easier for him to go. But that was a killer. I ended up doing a lot of pushing the bike and just walking alongside because there's just no way I could make it. Well, we get to the top, and it's now 2,000 meters above sea level, and it was we were in a cloud, and it was cold, and we were shivering because we started out in shorts, so didn't have really warm clothes, and everything was damp. So Carly said, "Let's go inside and have a hot chocolate." Boy, that was the best hot chocolate ever. So we sat in there for a while and got warmed up, and then we carried on. Well, we're going downhill now and going through this tunnel. I was up front, Paul behind me, and Carl was holding up the back. Well, we just got barely out of the tunnel. There was this bus in front of us, and he put on the brakes. And I put on the brakes. Paul puts on the brakes. And I looked to my left, and I see Carl's just flying by, and he's yelling, "Merdalo!" And, well, for a guy that's learning to be a priest, I was shocked. Also, I knew he wasn't praying. He was saying something that wasn't kosher. But what happened was his brakes, he had new style brakes, and they were getting wet, so they didn't catch. Paul and I, we had the old style brakes, and they, even when they get wet, they work just the same. But anyway, Carl was able to stop a couple 100 feet further down, and he was a bit shook up because flying by that bus kind of was unrattling, I guess. But downhill we go now, and that was quite the trip. So one year we had a bit of a plague. We had an invasion of the field mice. Now there's house mice and there's field mice. Field mice, they make tunnels, and they also end up pushing up dirt. So for the farmers, there was two problems. One is sometimes when the cows walk along and they trip over, or the soil will collapse if there's too many tunnels close together, and they fell over, broke their legs. And so the farmers got together and pooled some money, and you could, if you catch a mouse, you cut off the tail and you bring it in, and you get paid. So usually it was, I think, Wednesday late afternoons. We go there and we bring our mice and we get paid. But the whole concept worked out quite well. Hooray, it's payday. That's us there, big grin on their faces, going for the money. And they pay actually quite well. So that was my first start of being self-employed. Now our region also got very popular doing embroidery, and the embroidery started in 1760 in St. Gallen, and once they invented this Schiffli stick machine or embroidery machine, in 1863 they really got into mass production, and the whole area was quite producing a lot of that stuff. And in 1864, Retter in Winterthur started the mass producing some of this machinery. Now, along the way to school, there was this place where you could hear the machine, especially somewhere the windows open, you hear it rattling away. Of course, I couldn't help it one day, just said, well, I'll go check it out. And I asked if I could come in and watch what he was doing. And so he was standing at that main console where he had the pattern, what he was going to do. And they had a couple of women, and they just kept make sure that all the threads were properly in there, and they just kept buzzing back and forth and working the other end, and he was just steady hand moving it around all day long. But I was fascinated by that machine. Well, now that you know what it was like in the 50s in Eschlikon as kids, you're probably wondering what was it like for parents. Well, it wasn't easy. Like in our case, we had no fridge, no washer and dryer, no television until the mid-60s. And so, well, you look around the neighborhood and you see how they were making a living. Now, the Gauchis, he was manufacturing windows. So he took it from the raw lumber right up to the finished windows. And they had 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys. And on the other side of the spectrum we have the Toblers. Tobler was a butcher, so he processed everything. And they also had a store where he was selling his meat. Then they had a restaurant that his wife was running. And he was also the first one in the village who got a television, because he figured, well, it may be good for business. Unfortunately, he found out that when people were watching television, they weren't consuming much, so that television disappeared pretty quick. And you can see what a lot of work can do. In our case, Mom ran the store and looked after the family, and you can see that was not an easy task. And Dad grew vegetables and flowers, and so that was sort of a 7-day, well, you didn't have to work 7 days, but you always had to be there because you had to, in the summertime, open up the louvers for the greenhouses and make sure everything was watered. And then we also, with the flowers, plant the bulbs and do the harvesting. And sometimes money was tight. I could tell our dad when he was grumpy, he knew that there was no cash in his pocket. So you can see that the prosperity in Switzerland did not come by sitting on your hands. It's hard work, education, innovation, and also what's important is that the country had democracy, justice, and peace. They did not get into the war in the Second World War, so that really gave them an opportunity after the war to flourish, even though it was hard on the families, but they all survived and built a future for the next generation. I hope you like the insight